Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Purple Corner. And today I'm talking to Jigs Ashar, who's author, banker, runner. I wanted to ask at the very beginning, is it in that order? Do you identify in that order of roles?
So, firstly, Prakriti, thanks for having me over. It's a pleasure. And to your question, right? So these are the three personalities, right? Which I kind of co-own in that sense, right? But none of that, not one of them takes precedence over the other at all points in time. But I'm one of these three at any point in time, right? So when I want to be creative, and I'll come to that on how I started my writing journey. So at that time, I'm an author. When I'm writing, of course, professionally, writers have to keep the kitchen fires burning. So that's where the banking bit comes. And I've always been a banker. It's like 28 years now that I've been in the banking field. So yes, that's a banker and a consultant is what professionally to kind of earn my livelihood. I do that, and of course, running is to for mental and physical fitness, which I think is very essential to every one of us, right? So yeah, these three hats I wear them interchangeably during the day, and yeah, I'm happy about that.
Lovely. I didn't give you a formal introduction. So Jigs has written, correct me if I'm wrong, but have you've written two books before? The Cabinet Conspiracies, your third, and you have three others already in the making. I saw you had. I mean,
Yes.
this is the first time I saw an author having three books like announced, sort of, publicly, which is really cool, and I think shows the commitment that you have had. You continue to have towards that book after book, getting your books out one after the other, so that's commendable. You mentioned very briefly, and it's good because that was my first question, that because this is our first conversation, I want to go back to the beginning, right?
So,
You started writing from a short story at the Write India competition, as far as from what I've read online. If I don't know if there was like a less public version of this, but how did that come about? How did the inspiration or the motivation to write that first story come about after having been years in banking consultants in a very corporate setup, etc.? Is that what is the kind of journey been? How did that come about?
so it was quite by chance, actually. As you rightly said, I was with an MNC bank at that point in time, which was 2017. So that was like 18 years with the bank, highly corporate, working, with overseas markets, etc. Um, and around that time, I think all credit goes to my wife, actually, Vidya, who always, I don't know, somehow she thought that I should write something, right? And she actually found out a creative writing course, which was very close to where I was working at that time, in South Bombay, at the Xavier's Institute, right? And that was an evening course, goes on for 9 weeks, and you learn the different facets of writing. And she said, I think you will enjoy this course. Why don't you do it? I was very reluctant. And finally, on the last day of, where you had to kind of pay the fees and take admission, she gave me a deadline that if you don't go today, I'm going to go, okay, and pay the fees. So that kind of was more like a threat. So I just went, I paid the fees, joined that. And actually, that was probably the beginning, I would say, of my where I took writing more seriously, because the professor there was also, you might be aware that we have to make, whenever there is a session, you have to make a few submissions, write short stories, etc. And she said, don't give it up, Jigs. I see something and please pursue this. So that was kind of encouragement. And coincidentally, right? So my life as a writer has been full of coincidences, and I've been very fortunate in that sense. So the Write India contest, right, which is a national short story writing contest, uh, which is organized by the Times of India group. So that was on at that time, and it's season two. And one fine day in the Times of India, I see a big photo of Sir Jeffrey Archer, who's probably a favorite amongst all readers, and so is mine, who was the author of the month, right? And he had given a prompt to write a thriller. And that's how I said, okay, let me participate. And I wrote my first short story titled The Weight is Killing. And, I was kind of thrilled that I won that. And the judge was none other than Jeffrey Archer, right? So that was like everything was kind of falling in place at around the same time. The next month, again, I participated in the Right India. That time, the judge was Miss Shobha Day. I wrote a humorous kind of a slice of life story there. Again, I won. So those were, I think, encouragement enough. And around the same time, Ravi Subramanian, who's one of India's leading author and novelist, he read The Weight is Killing. And he called me one fine day and he said, Jigs, I'm working with Westland Publications at that time, which is an Amazon Group company, to mentor and give debut authors a chance to write thrillers. And would you be interested in writing a novel? And I said, "Yeah, why not? I mean, neki or pooch pooch, as we say."
Yeah.
And I said, certainly. And so he said, okay, come to my office whenever you're ready with some ideas, we'll discuss. So I think within a couple of weeks, I went to him with three ideas, three storylines. He liked two of them, and that's how my first two novels, which is Insomnia and The Brutal Hand, were published. So yes, very lucky in that sense. And I think probably another first I've had as a writer is both my books were released on the same day,
Oh wow.
7th September 2020, right? So
Wow.
I,
It's
I
like
I I can't say one is my debut novel. Both of them are.
this is the filmfare equivalent of getting like both best debut and best actor awards in the same year. That's amazing. But did you have a history of storytelling or a passion for storytelling in any form before that kind of even perhaps made Vidya think that okay, this is something you'd enjoy, or were you a voracious reader or before
So,
you start writing,
yeah,
or even
a
during?
mix of two. I mean, when my daughter was young, right, every night I used to tell her a story. She wouldn't sleep without listening to a story. And it wasn't that I would read from a book, right? She would just want me to create something every night. So that's how I used to I think that was probably it in terms of my storytelling capability at that time. But there must have been something, Prakriti, because I remember, and something which was so buried in my subconscious, it never came to the fore until I signed my first contract for Insomnia and a Brutal Hand, right? That it actually took me back to my school days. And I remember it was the ninth standard, and and in school we all have to write essays, right? And once my English teacher, Mrs. Mehta, called me to the staff room, and like all kids, I was worried if kids are called to the staff room, it's probably for detention, right? But she called me and she was actually correcting papers. She was reading my essay. She said, she just told me one sentence, she said, you know what? I read your essay. I really enjoyed it. And someday you're going to write a book, which was nine.
Did
And
you
it
share that news with her when it came out?
completely, no, I mean, God bless her. She had passed by then
Oh, I'm so sorry.
when it came out. Otherwise, I mean, she would have been the first person I would have gone to.
Yeah.
But I had completely forgotten about this incident, and just when I signed my contract and oh God, I'm going to be a published author is when all this came about. So that's about it, but nothing.
Yeah. The dots connect in hindsight always.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah. So coming to like the cabinet conspiracy, right? Because that's the book we're talking about. Um, for me, it's always very fascinating. I know you've written thrillers before, and that seems to be the genre you work in, and we'll get to that kind of genreization of your writing in a bit. But specifically to this, the political administration and civic workings of a part, like of literally the government. Um, Two parts to this question. One is, did it involve a lot of research? Did you have to research that a lot? We know what happens public facing, but often there's only Lok Sabha proceedings or Rajya Sabha proceedings that you have as an insight to what happens behind doors, and maybe hearsay, maybe rumors, maybe stuff that's portrayed in movies that we are told is based on a certain truth, but there's no way to actually get your a personal eye into that. So what was your process to get those things in place?
So one is, yeah, as you rightly said, the political thriller or any political thriller for that matter, right? In whichever country it is based in, cannot be pure fiction, right? Because when you are talking about real politicians or a cabinet, as I am speaking about, it has to be based in truth because the reader will say, yes, this is true. I mean, there is a position like that, there is a prime minister, and there is a geopolitical issue which Jigs is trying to talk about or the author is trying to talk about, right? So those have to be real. So the real part of my story, right, in Cabinet Conspiracy had to be thoroughly well researched. And I used a series of methods to do that research, right? One was, of course, a lot of secondary research. Um, some of them are well known. For example, the tension between India and China is well known, right?
Yeah, yeah,
But if you go a layer deeper, right, and if you look at the Belt and Road Initiative, which is China's global ambition, right? If you read a bit more about it, it's mind-boggling, right? The kind of economics they have in mind, the kind of scale is crazy. And once you read that, and then you have a country which is India, and all these are facts as we speak, right? None of it is fiction as of now. Is a country, a large country where China wants some interest, refuses to sign, right? Not only refuses to sign, but our Prime Minister, Mr. Modi, has actually gone on public record at various global forums like the World Economic Forum, etc., and has kind of, in a way, condemned the BRI and the debt trap that it brings with it. So when you add this, and these are facts, um, and then this adds a kind of a fiction takes over a bit, and then you try to add a sinister layer to this entire factual, real political situation. That how far could China go to get India's prime minister out of the way, right? And that's how the idea of the story was born. But coming back to the research that I did, if I did secondary research, I would always ensure credibility of the source, and it would never be from one source, right? So I needed two or three corroborations from credible sources before I say, okay, this is true, because I didn't want a one-sided view, which could be painted in the media, right? So I made sure of that. Second is I have also consulted with the World Bank. I still consult with the World Bank for Asia. um, I have been with a multinational bank for many years, so I know a lot of people across geographies, right? So there are certain things which anecdotally I would bounce off my colleagues from other countries that, hey, I'm reading this, or what do you think about this particular issue, right? And they would always share some insight which is not published or available on paper, right? So it was a mix of these various types of research that I used to write the book.
in that must have been extensive. How many years did like this whole process from idea, I guess idea, I a book never has one genesis. I get it. A stories come in parts. Sometimes they come as one idea, but how much time did it all take you to put together all
Yes,
this?
for the cabinet conspiracy, the idea about the BRI and India, China, and China thinks that, okay, let's get India's prime minister out of the way, and let's assassinate the prime minister. That idea came to me in 2018, right, in April, when I did extensive reading on the BRI, right? And finally, the book released in December 23. So, yeah, 5.5 years.
Idea for that long, does it get difficult? I would imagine it does. Like for me, whenever I've started to write, or even forget writing, any kind of project that you undertake, that sustained commitment is such a difficulty. Sustained belief in your vision is such a difficulty. Did you face that?
So, I think one advantage that I have inherently is that I'm generally a very patient person, right? I generally don't get worked up. I'm not impatient. I don't want to do things in a hurry. And I think good things take time, right? So, for example, I started writing when I was like 46, right? So that's fine. I mean, I honestly I did get impatient or wanted to write something in a hurry, or I was never in a hurry to publish the book and get it out. I waited for the right publisher. I waited for the publisher to be as excited about the story as I was, right? So I waited for that, and yeah, I mean, I'm happy with the way it is. It's taken time, but I'm happy with where it is.
That is, well, I think a thing or two we could all learn, because I know a lot of writers who get very impatient about it. I so this and this is thematic. So every month, what we do is we celebrate a theme. January just happens to be the theme of debuts, and I know you're not a debut author, but you're very close. Your third book, and like you said, your first to release together. And so, to all the authors you've been talking to this month, this has been something very curious, like something I'm very curious about is that the muscle required to write short stories and the muscle required to write novels and then do that continuously. You have, in a span of a few years, you'll have 6 books out in a fairly shorter span. I think you've really taken after Jeffrey Archer in that
I wish.
in that kind of quantitative year by year publishing strike rate. What is that muscle development? That takes time, I would assume. That takes a lot of polish. It takes a lot of not just patience, which of course you mentioned is a virtue, but a lot of creative, continuous creative upgrading. Did you face that once you went from short stories to the first 2 novels?
So clearly, both have their own sets of challenges and the excitement that they both bring, right, in terms of creativity. So, short story, of course, for example, the Right India stories, the word limit is 3,000 words, right? And in which, if you technically look at a story, then it needs an introduction, it needs a conflict, and the action, the climax, and the conclusion, etc. And everything has to be there for it to be a good story, right? So clearly, in terms of drafting and redrafting it, takes a little longer, to my mind. Whereas when you're writing a novel, um, I think more important is are two things. If it's something like the cabinet conspiracy, where there are a lot of real events and there is fiction, then the research has to be A grade, right? You can't falter on that. And the second one is because it's a longer format, how do you ensure that you're holding the attention of the reader?
Hmm.
So the pacing of the novel,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
When you're writing about real events, or even if it's, say, pure fiction, it can't get so detailed and drag even for a moment, right? So the pacing and the research that you do, or how much detail that you put in, is a challenge. And sometimes what happens in a longer format novel is that because there are multiple characters and there are multiple threads which are running for a story, that all has to tie in a very organic manner for the reader. Right? The reader can't say, "Hey, but what happened to that character?" Right?
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
mean,
Continuity is a big challenge.
that's it. So yeah, I mean, both are as interesting, but I think once you move to a novel kind of writing, you would, I mean, at least I would be a little. I mean, I have not written a short story since
Okay.
the first three, right? I mean, I mentioned two, and in the same year, in 2018, I had written another one called Duel,
Yes, I remember.
which was also shortlisted by Juggernaut for the Short Story of the Year award.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, since those three, I have not written a short story. Like they've been writing novels.
Like something opened up and then you could never go back to the fewer words format.
Yeah, maybe.
So
Maybe.
now I want to come to, of course, the fact that you've written thrillers mostly, except for the one short story, the second Right India short story, which you mentioned is Slice of Life. Um, what is it about the genre that keeps you coming back to it, um, like repeatedly now?
So one is, of course, I have grown up reading thrillers.
Oh,
So I've
lovely.
read different kind of genres, but I really enjoyed reading thrillers, right? So I would have probably tried something which is maybe funny, maybe drama. So for example, a lot of Jeffrey Archer books are not exactly thrillers, right? But they are just kind of drama,
Yeah.
right? So, but what I really enjoyed reading was a very natural go-to genre when I started writing. right? Um, so that's how it naturally started. Uh, I kind of believe that I should write what I enjoy reading, right? So yes, the first three and the next three, which are in the pipeline, are all thrillers. Of the three which are coming up, two are true crime stories. So yeah, looking forward to that. And unless I'm like completely bereft of ideas on writing thrillers, I think I'll probably continue this.
Wow. So two things to this as a writer, right? One is how precisely when you write a lot of what you watched or read, it's very, I think, in subconsciously intuitive, whatever the word, I'm not quite getting the right word, but it's probably a natural extension that sometimes you sound like them. So that's one, at least, in the writing process, if you've read a lot of thrillers, it's very easy to sound like them and take a minute or before you would understand what your voice in that genre is, right? And the second challenge that would I imagine arise if you're writing the same genre is the repetition of tone, perhaps repetition of, it's easy if you're thinking about thriller for thriller to probably think in formulas, because the genre also lends itself to a certain easy boxable formulas for the most part. Not saying that it's true, it should be true, but it tends to be. So how do you are you aware of these things? Were you aware going into your first two books and then the Cabinet Conspiracy, and how are you kind of thinking about these things?
So one is when you like, for example, I was a voracious reader and I still read, maybe not voraciously, but I read, right? So I'm at any given point in time, I'm reading a book. Um, so what I learned from, for example, say Jeffrey Archer, Agatha Christie, Robert Ludlum, Kigo Higashino, Robert Ludlum, Tom Clancy, right, is the how they develop a plot, right, and the characters, right, how they develop the characters, the lead characters, the surrounding characters, how they tie up the loose ends, and how you just want to keep turning page after page, right? So these are, I would say, structurally what all these authors or a good storyteller would have in common, right? And then when I was studying writing, I realized that every good story, right? Maybe it's not a written story, but if you even it could be a visual story, right? So you take any good movie, like if you look at Sholay, if you look at Dangal, they all have a very common pattern, right? And I've actually studied those, and they follow a same graph of a good story. So there are three acts in a play, in a good story, in any medium. And first, there is the introduction of the characters, etc. You set the characters, then you set the conflict, right? What the movie is all about. Then there is rising action, right? So everything, the challenges, etc., that are faced. There is a climax, then there is a falling action, and there is a conclusion, right? So all these good stories and the good books, right, irrespective of the style of writing, because that I think is to each his own or her own. All of them followed a very similar structure, and that's how I realized how a good story should be written, right? So that's something that I've learned and I've taken over from these masters, right? But if I look at being, for example, repetitive or the tone, etc. So my first, so Insomnia was a psychological thriller. Brutal Hand was about a serial killer. Cabinet Conspiracy is a geopolitical, real world thriller. The next two are true crime, right? So true crime, the plot and the tone, etc., will be different because they are anyway based on true crime stories which have happened. Incidentally, one of them, the next one which will release, is set around the Second World War in Madras at that time. And that was India's first case where forensics was used to solve a murder mystery, right? It was the first time forensics was used in
I
India.
love that. I would love to even watch a movie of that, and we'll talk about it later.
So again, these two are true crime. And then the sixth book, which I'm writing, is based on my years of experience in the financial
Wow.
world, right? Which is on financial crime and how the world of finance and the world of terrorism are so intricately linked. So again, there I've taken a few real life scams or incidents within the financial world that have happened, but I woven it in a single story which spans across 15, 20 years in a particular bank, right? So all these are very different stories, different plots. So, and hopefully by the time I'm done with these three more, which is I think by mid or end of 2025, I'm sure I'll have some new ideas to write about.
I'm sure. Good for storytellers, bad for life. Crime is always varied and never ends. There's always something to be inspired by in that sense.
Well
But
said.
this is something I was, I guess, subconsciously thinking. But you do have a lot of these facets of crime. Did you also study a lot of like? Did you end up by way of writing or through your writing end up understanding criminal psychology, forensic science, things like that? Did you have to touch and learn about these topics as well? Was that I'm just curious. This wasn't really part of my question
So,
as such.
for example, for Insomnia, right, which is a psychological thriller, or for this new book, which is The Headless Victim, which is around the forensics case that I mentioned, right? I did read up a lot of known books on that, right, to
Lovely.
just understand. Then, while this was the first case for India, it was already prevalent in other parts of the world, right?
Yeah.
So I traced the history of forensics itself as a subject on how the first case ever happened, which was like way back, and some tribals and somebody used, in a way, not known as forensics, but they used some of those uh, methods to identify the killer, etc. So yeah, I did study a lot. I read a lot of books because, as I mentioned, I just wanted, if I'm writing on a subject, for it to be well researched and the reader should find it believable and plausible. Okay, huh, this can happen at times, or I've seen that happen. So
The nerd in me was very excited when you said trace the history of forensic science. I was like, I have to
absolutely,
get this. I
absolutely.
I'm like a little I've not read thrillers in a while, but this I'm excited, most excited about. Let me be frank. So um to kind of close, that's it's an amazing journey you've had as a writer, one that's but also you've gone from what I assume is a very different culture of industry, right? You've gone from being in the banking and consulting in the corporate MNC world to publishing. I see you've gone from probably conference rooms to lit fest rooms, and I, at least in how my experience has been, they are fairly different in terms of culture, in terms of general energy, in terms of the dynamics. The larger, any industry has its own kind of fairly similar in terms of hierarchies, etc. But there is a certain difference in how people behave with each other, what they talk about, perhaps in the topics of conversation, etc. What has that journey been for you like? It's something I've spoken to a lot of uh, writers who were formerly corporates or who continue to have a corporate job, but it has only recently I've been curious about, like, yeah, but being in two different kinds of room, probably from my Gadchiroli trip, I was like, being in two different kinds of rooms, you end up sometimes censoring yourself more in one room than another. Sometimes, you know, definitely dressed very differently going to, I knew what is a remote area, so I had to change up a lot of the way I dressed. And that may seem like a small thing, but that is very much the series of such small things that influence when you change fields for lack of a better term. Did you have that kind of like journey as well?
Um, of course, there is a journey, and even now, like for example, I still consult with the World Bank. I do a lot of professional consulting. I'm in the BFSI space. So when you are there, you're just wearing a different hat, right? And you have to kind of switch off from being a writer or whatever, the creative part of you, and then get into when you're writing, then you're just being that creative self, right? So I think just as every individual, and it's not unique to you or me, I think every individual has multiple facets, has multiple
Yeah.
talents which are there, right? One just has to harness those and do justice and find the time to do justice to, if not all, then at least three, four of them, right? And you find that time and inclination to do that. So while it has been very different, as you rightly said, from
In what
wearing
ways?
your
What were the first time you say, for example, had a book reading or a book launch or a book lit fest? What was that one stark thing that you were like, oh my god, this is very different from like my conference rooms? Did you have that one moment of like, oh, this is different here?
certainly. So certainly, because see, so one key difference is, you know, after my initial years in banking, right, one would be fairly confident in, say, a conference room kind of a setting, right, or when you're meeting clients, because you are talking about your pedigree is your experience in the field for many years, right? Whereas here, as a writer, and probably it's my debut, right?
Yeah.
So that some bit of apprehension, anxiety is always there. Right? It is a very new field, and will I succeed? Will people like it, etc. Uh, a case in point is when for Insomnia I gave my first interview, right? And I was like wondering, what do I say? Will it go well? Will it not go well, right? Um, but yeah, with time you learn, you gain in confidence, and the butterflies
It
tend to kind
was
of settle a bit.
it was a lot like starting over for you. Like, people have this at the first job, I guess. Like, oh my God, everyone knows more than I do. Everyone is more experienced than I do.
And on a lighter note, when I joined the classes in Xavier's, right? So the first day, and there are a lot of students who are undergrad students who do that because either they are really interested or some of them do it because they want to show it on their resume, right? That I've done this course. And when I entered the class, everybody mistook me for the professor, right? Because everybody was very young, graduates, undergraduates. And then later, when I went and sat with them, I realized that okay, I mean, I don't belong here, but
So you had that moment of doubt in your
I, I just shared it with my wife later that evening, and we were just laughing about it.
mind.
I still find it quite
But
funny.
I think, like, I love the fact that you went to that course, and because a lot of people would first jump into writing, and not to say that one is better than the others in approach, but I think that really speaks to the methodical, what I assume would be a very methodical planning kind of mindset that you would come with, bringing your consulting kind of brain to even your approach to your journey as an author. Not just so being a writer is very creative, but again, being an author comes back to numbers and business, and a lot of the it's a deal at the end of the day. The writing is the creative bit, the getting the story out is the creating bit, but the moment that is done, it's all okay. How do I meet the get to publishing? How do I sell it? How do I talk more about it? Which is out and out commercial,
Absolutely.
transactional, and that's not a bad thing, but that is a thing that people don't recognize enough.
Absolutely, absolutely right. And actually, even one thing which I learned in my probably the work life, right, in the corporates, was being very structured and organized, right. So even when I'm writing, the idea about a plot, right, or when I'm penning down the story on paper, actually, and that's how I work, is the creative part, right. But then when I get to it, it's pure science, I
Yeah.
would say, right, because then at least I am very organized. So every chapter would be written in 4 5 line summaries first. So I know that no character is out of the reader's mind for a long time. All the loose ends are tied. So when I actually start my novel writing, I have my 53, 54 chapters in 4 5 lines each
Oh wow.
written with me on Excel. And then I just have to kind of elaborate on every chapter, right?
Oh
And
wow.
I think 95% I'll just stick to that structure and that
That's
story. Right?
fascinating. If you are comfortable, I'd love to include like a snapshot of that Excel in the interview transcript that goes.
Certainly,
Just as
I'll
a
share it with you.
fun
Yeah,
exercise. I think it would be really cool for readers to understand how outlines look in person, right? In actuality. Even today, like doing for different you are very organized. So what is your approach to keeping that writing time, work time, your consultation time, family time? I assume like every there's different roles you play in a day also, not just in general life. What is that one process that you have? Okay, this hour is my writing time. Do you have that, or do you just write whenever you get some time, which doesn't
yeah.
not fit what you've told me so far, but I'm still curious.
So I don't write every day. Okay,
Okay.
I don't have that discipline. So when I sit to write, I'm very organized. But for me to sit to write is, I wouldn't say difficult, but I'm not very disciplined. For example, these days I'm just kind of talking about my book and traveling to literature festivals and book signing events, etc. So I have not written for a while. But once this kind of settles down, then I'll get back to writing my next. So,
Your
but yeah,
headless victim.
yes, but I'm always thinking about my book, and because as I mentioned, I have all these chapters which are written down in summaries. If I'm stuck somewhere, or if I'm going to elaborate some chapter, it's when I'm running or when I'm traveling, etc. I'm always thinking about what to do there, and then I just go back and add it to my notes, right? So that process is always on.
Physical exercise of any kind really fuels creativity. At least in my experience, in anecdotal interviews, etc., I've learned that like manual labor is the best fuel for creative kind of the brain to kind of get accelerate its creativity. Do you also get your best ideas while running? Have you experienced that?
I do many times I do, and even when I'm stuck on a so when I have writer's block, right? I actually plan that okay, I have this long run. I'm going to run these 15 kilometers, so which is say roughly around 105, 110 minutes, and I will run alone, and I will crack this one, right? So I'm then just thinking about that particular point, which I have to kind of crack in my writing, and most times than not, at the end of the run, it's I do have some solutions. Yeah,
That is amazing. I am so inspired. Honestly, like I've not worked out for 3 months, so this is a great conversation starter. I think, yeah, this has been lovely. I'm still marveling at the fact that you have 3 books ready in the pipeline. I have literally not met anybody who has that much of a kind of buffer publishing pipeline, but that speaks to you. I look forward to reading. Mostly like cabinet conspiracy, I'll be honest, I've read a bit about, not read it yet. But it's the headless victim that I'm most excited about. So while everyone who loves political thrillers, I'm going to put details, details and links to his books in the description on the channel. But I'm already looking forward to your next one. Yes, thank you. I love the design of the cover as well. Who has designed it? Was through the publisher? You did you work on did you work with the designer on this?
certainly yes, because as the story is about China, so I was very clear I needed the cover to be red. I needed to show something because it's about the Indian politics, right? So I needed to show a building or something, or in a way convey that it has to do with Indian politics. And the fact there is a Chinese flag, the stars behind,
Yeah,
and because it's the story of an assassination plot on the
got
Prime
it.
Minister of India,
Yeah,
there
yeah.
are two bullet marks as well in the cover. So
I think
this,
this is, yeah, it's a very like descriptive. If you could, even if you didn't read the title or the blurb, I think you could tell what this book was about very immediately. Um,
but
and the
I look forward to hearing how you like the book.
I will do my so I will do my best to read it. I'm not so politics and me go back a little
But
while.
it's not very political.
Yeah,
It's just as much as it is required.
yeah,
Otherwise, it's a pure thriller.
definitely going to do my best efforts to read it and look forward to. I'm personally biased for the headless victim, um, because I also think that World War II and any world war actually, but the global South's roles in these wars has never been spoken about enough. So just by way of the work we do, right, I'm genuinely been very curious and passionate about bringing these stories, and there's never enough time to like look for and commission stories that are specific to particular themes or topics or around events that you really like. This happens to be exactly that, like a World War II story from India, based in India, or portraying India has been on my mind forever, because I am a huge historical fiction nerd. I love reading stories that are based in a certain past and kind of fly with it.
Yeah.
So that's just contextualizing why I'm so excited about the headless victim. Not to say that I don't want to read the cabinet conspiracy at all. Just that has just been like, oh my god, this is a story I've been wanting to read for a while and never got out got around to writing it myself, but finally you are. So that's where my excitement was coming from, not to devalue
Understand.
the current one. But this has been a lovely conversation. It was such a pleasure talking to you.
My pleasure.
Organization of thought and clarity is always inspiring to me, because if you saw my room right now, I'd be like, oh, it's chaos because I'm packing for JLF and there's zero method in this madness. So I'm super inspired. I'm really looking forward to reading The Cabinet Conspiracy and The Headless Victim. And I wish you all the very best for the next 3 books. And I look forward to collaborating with you on those as well.
Thank you so much, Bhargavi. It's been a real pleasure. So thank you once again for having me over.